Now pay attention 007. When a new Bond film is announced, I'm more excited about the music and who's going to compose it than I am who's playing James Bond, believe it or not. And I'm going to tell you who I would like as the composer for the next Bond film, why, and who I really don't want back. Unlike the generic royalty-free music track that's accompanying this very video, I think that the music of James Bond is absolutely fantastic. When it comes to films in general, I'm a huge soundtrack nerd. I have a CD collection of hundreds and hundreds of soundtracks that I've collected since I was about 12 years old. I'm up there with my passion for Bond is my passion for music, and the two, for me, luckily go hand in hand because a great Bond film needs a great soundtrack. With every Bond film, even the ones that I'm not huge fans of and right up to my favourite Bond films, the music is always a key ingredient for me, and it really has to be right. Even the worst Bond films, in my opinion, can still have fantastic soundtracks. Moonraker is a film that I'm not a huge fan of, for example. However, the soundtrack is incredible. I have the original, I have an expanded edition, I've got the recent La La Land expanded edition, and I also have that version on vinyl. So just to put it out there, even the worst Bond film, or film in general, can have a good soundtrack. And therefore, when it comes to the next Bond film, the film after No Time to Die, I really want it to have a good soundtrack, and I'm really excited to find out who is going to be composing the music. I have a few people that I do want to compose it. I'd be interested in hearing what they have, their take on it, and also who I wouldn't want to come back as a Bond composer. So let's talk first of all about who I don't want to come back. I remember when No Time to Die was announced, I was really excited about who's going to compose this film. I know that we'd had Thomas Newman for Skyfall and Spectre, but that Sam Mendes, the director, wasn't returning for No Time to Die, and he always works with Thomas Newman, so something in my brain said Thomas Newman's not going to return. And I was a little bit disappointed because I did like what he was doing with the soundtracks to the Bond films. However, I was also really excited about who we could have, and the announcement was we had Dan Romer, who was going to be the composer. Now, I was a big fan of Dan Romer because at the time I was playing through a video game called Far Cry 5, and I downloaded and purchased the soundtrack to that game because I thought it was brilliant. It was really quirky, it was really different, it was a mix mash of lots of different genres of music. There was lots of different styles and a lot of creativity going on there, and that's what I really want in a Bond soundtrack, creativity. And I remember when it was announced that he was in it, I was speaking to one of my friends who's also a bit of a Bond music nerd, and I said, you know what, I thought they were going to go with someone safe and someone generic, perhaps someone like Hans Zimmer. Okay, so then Dan Romer was no longer composing the film for some reason, and we ended up with Hans Zimmer. Now, Hans Zimmer is an incredible composer, don't get me wrong. I am a huge film score nerd, and I'm not going to say that I don't like Hans Zimmer. However, I think Hans Zimmer was fantastic back in the 90s, things like Broken Arrow, things like The Peacemaker, things like Crimson Tide, Gladiator, The Lion King. These were all fantastic Hans Zimmer soundtracks. And since then, he has obviously produced some fantastic work, but I feel that there's a very much a Zimmer sound, and it is very much him, and it's almost become a little bit generic for me when I'm listening to it. I almost know what the soundtrack album's going to sound like, and that's not to put down any other work that he's done. He's obviously an incredible composer, but when it was announced that he was going to be doing the Bond film, my heart sank a little bit because I remember having the chat with a friend of mine back when I was probably about 13 or 14 years old, and we were discussing our favourite composers, and we both said at some point, Hans Zimmer's a brilliant composer, but I wouldn't want him doing a Bond soundtrack because he's just not that kind of composer for me. And when I listen to the No Time to Die soundtrack, there's a few highlights on there, but I've noticed that all the tracks that I really, really like in there are the ones that incorporate the Bond theme. So things like when the car's escaping, does the donuts with the machine guns and it escapes through the town, and that whole opening section, the bits where Bond goes back to MI5 and we've got Hans Zimmer's riff on the Bond theme. Those are my favourite tracks from it, and the only thing I think probably why they switched to him is just to give the film a little bit more weight. You know, we've got this director, we've got this composer, we've got this actor. It's, you know, it's a big film, big important film. So I was a little bit disappointed. It's not my favourite soundtrack out of all the Bond films. I listened to a few times, a few tracks. I never really listened to the whole thing. I think potentially nobody could have done that end sequence. I don't think anybody could have potentially done that as Zimmer did, and I think it does lend a lot of wit to the third act of that film. However, still not my favourite soundtrack, unfortunately. I do not want him back for the next Bond film at all. I think we can go with somebody very quirky, very different, and somebody who can bring their own spin on the Bond theme. So whether you like Thomas Newman, what he did with it, whether you like any of the other non-John Barry composers, Marvin Hamlish, George Martin, all of these composers, they've all brought their own sound, and I think they've all been successful in bringing their own voice to the Bond music. They haven't tried to emulate something else, or they haven't tried to copy John Barry. They've brought their very own unique taste to it. To be fair, Hans Zimmer did do that. It's just perhaps it's not a taste that I enjoy, unfortunately. But I think there's a few composers that I would love to hear their take on the next James Bond soundtrack. I'm going to show you a few CDs that I have in my soundtrack collection, and it's of a particular composer. I have all of the CDs that this composer has ever put out, right from his very early stuff right up to his new stuff. I'm going to just show you them, and you can see if you can guess who he is. I showed you the first one. I've just realized that this isn't going to work because he's got his name on the front, but my favorite composer of all time is John Powell. I think John Powell is an absolutely fantastic composer. He has a real understanding of how to use an orchestra in a way that Hans Zimmer has never really shown to me. He also brings a lot of fun, a lot of quirkiness to every one of his soundtracks, and there's a few soundtracks that I think if you're not familiar with his work that you should totally be listening to. Paycheck is an incredible soundtrack. It's an action soundtrack. It's got some futuristic stuff. It's got an excellent orchestral element to it and also some nice electronic stuff. It's a bit of a rubbish film, but it's a really, really good soundtrack, and this is the deluxe edition that I have. Bond needs a big orchestral element to it, and I think there's no better score than John Powell's X-Men: The Last Stand. It's, again, a mediocre film, but the soundtrack is absolutely fantastic, and if you listen to how much fun he had with this composer and stuff, and how it matches up to the action scenes and the softer scenes in the film, I think you will agree that this would translate absolutely fantastically to a Bond film. How to Train Your Dragon is, again, another film that has nothing to do with James Bond, but listen to the way that the guy uses the orchestra in this and how much fun goes into each of his cues, and I think you can see why I want John Powell to be the next Bond composer. Finally, I'm going to give a shout out to The Bourne Identity. Again, this was kind of the anti-Bond film soundtrack. It was electronic, it was grungy, it was dark. Nobody really liked it at the time, but it actually got me into John Powell's music, and I think it's definitely worth a listen. The impact that this score has had on the espionage genre in general is absolutely fantastic, and I think although I wouldn't like to hear a Bond film like this, it's just useful for you to go back and hear where John Powell came from. Another composer that I hear mentioned a lot that I actually think would be quite a quirky choice is Daniel Pemberton. He did The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which is an absolutely fantastic espionage score. None of his soundtracks sound the same. They're all different. They all utilize different instruments, and they all have a different approach, and they're very fun scores to listen to, for sure. Whether you think he should be the next Bond composer or not is entirely up to you. I think that he would be a very interesting shout. It's probably one of the best 60s style espionage soundtracks we've had in recent years, and whether or not you think Daniel Pemberton would be a good mix for the new Bond score, I think it's definitely worth a listen to as a fan of espionage. There's another two composers that I have a huge high regard for that I would love to see take on the Bond franchise, and the first of these is Henry Jackman. I think Henry Jackman really does know how to conduct an orchestra. He knows how to compose for action. He can handle softer themes, he can handle heavy themes, and I think his scores have an absolute huge element of fun to them. They're just a joy to listen to, and he has also already nodded and kind of done his homage to the Bond film when he did his Kingsman soundtracks. You'll have to excuse his signature on the front of this one. This is my signed copy, but this is an absolutely fantastic Secret Agent soundtrack. It's also just a fun listen. It's really good to listen to. I've sometimes had this on when I'm out running or driving around in the car or doing the school run. It's just such an exciting soundtrack, and I'd love to hear this kind of take on the Bond theme. To jump back into video games, he also composed the music for Uncharted 4, which is a perfect blend of action and adventure, as well as some softer themes that I think really would work for a Bond soundtrack, and I would love to see what he did with the franchise because he is definitely a fun composer. Another favourite composer of mine at the moment is Lorne Balfe, who I think is an absolutely incredible action composer. The way that he took the Mission Impossible theme in Fallout and he just ramped it up and made it exciting again was absolutely fantastic. I listen to that soundtrack all the time, especially when I'm out running. I listen to that kind of rooftops and staircases or whatever it is over and over again. It's such a fun soundtrack. He does a great job in Mission Impossible Fallout of using the Mission Impossible theme to really hammer home the action, and he does a little spin on it which is really, really nice. He also uses other themes from the TV show, which I think is really, really good. And he just does big, loud, goosebump-inducing action scores. Finally, another angle coming at this, so disregarding the composers that I've mentioned already, would be that when we see the next Bond film, we want to feel comfort, we want something comfortable. And does that mean we go back to a composer of a previous Bond film? And I think that is a totally viable option. I think if we're restarting the franchise, if we're rebooting it, or whether we're just kicking off Bond on another adventure, we need to have an element of comfort. And I think there's nobody that I would like back better, perhaps, than David Arnold. His first soundtrack was Tomorrow Never Dies. He also did The World's Not Enough, Die Another Day, Casino Royale, and Quantum of Solace. And I was disappointed he didn't get another Bond film. So I think if anybody's going to come back and induce a little element of nostalgia and make us feel all comfortable, there's nobody better than David Arnold. And I would love to hear him take on another Bond film. Having said all that, I think if I could pick just one composer at gunpoint, I would say I would love to hear how John Powell would tackle the franchise. I would love to hear his interpretation of the theme. I would love to hear his action cues and the fun and energy that he would inject into a Bond score. But what about you? What is your favorite Bond soundtrack of all time? Who would you like to hear tackling the Bond soundtrack for the next film, and why? Who would you not want back? Do you really, really want Hans Zimmer to come back? Do you want Thomas Newman to come back? Or do you, like me, would really be happy with David Arnold returning? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Please do give me a subscribe. I'm going back and I'm reviewing all of the Bond films after a ranking that I did at the start of the year, and I'm going to see how my ranking changes over the year as I watch them all. So if you're interested in that sort of thing and you want to hear a different bit of opinion and you want to have a little bit of chat about stuff, please do give me a subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one, because James Bond will return.